My PowerPoint has messed up on me and I didn't have time to try to fix the problem. Fortunately, I only had 2 slides I was going to use and they will be pretty simple to explain. In our next 3 classes, the last 3 classes of this quarter, we will be looking at 1 Kings chapter 1 through 11. Well, sort of. I'll explain that a little bit later. This is about the reign of Solomon and it concludes the period known as the United Kingdom. Saul, David, and Solomon were the kings during this period. Beginning in 1 Kings chapter 12 and going through the end of 1 Kings and all of 2 Kings covers what is called the divided kingdom. This will be the next class and it will be taught by Brent Fountain on Sunday mornings. I'm going to begin teaching the book of Acts on Wednesday, 3 weeks from tonight, July 1st. So the opening scene of 1 Kings chapter 1, shows David as an old man. According to calculations from 2 Samuel chapter 5, David is now 70 years old. David's servants have implemented an ancient practice of using a healthy person's body warmth to care for a sick person. This was a medical procedure noted by the 2nd century Greek physician Galen and the Jewish historian Josephus. David had not taken official actions to declare the next king. And of course, this created a potential power vacuum, and David's oldest living son, Adonijah, is determined to step into it. Adonijah enlisted the support of key allies, Joab, the military commander, Abiathar the priest, and he held a feast for leading dignitaries. Adonijah flaunted his royal pretensions with an entourage of chariots and runners. It is noteworthy whom he did not invite to the feast. He did not invite Nathan the prophet. He did not invite his younger brother Solomon, who had been designated to be the next king by a decree from God. We read in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 6 through 10, that David called for his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. David said to Solomon, "My son, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, but this word of the Lord came to me." Quote, "You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign. He is the one who will build a house for my name. He will be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever." End quote. So Nathan, when he finds out about what Adonijah is trying to do, Nathan the prophet instructs Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, to pose a question to King David regarding the promise that Solomon would be king. Nathan instructs her to go and ask David if he had not stated that Solomon would be the next king, then to tell him that they are making Adonijah king at that very moment. Nathan says he will come in at a few moments later and say the same thing to King David. Due to the fact that Adonijah is at that very moment holding a feast to proclaim himself king, there's no time to waste. The common practice in ancient times was that when a man became king, he would purge anyone who had any possible claim to the throne. So if Adonijah became king, it is likely that he would have put Solomon to death and possibly even Bathsheba. Bathsheba does as Nathan instructed her, and Nathan comes in moments later and confirms what she said to King David. It speaks highly of David that Nathan was still held in high esteem by King David after Nathan had rebuked him over his sin with Bathsheba. David does not hesitate. He calls for Nathan the prophet, he calls for Zadok the priest and Benaiah, who was a prominent warrior. He called for them to play the key roles in immediately anointing Solomon as the next king. On Benaiah for just a second, Benaiah served as the commander of the king's bodyguard, and he was considered one of David's mighty men. We read about him in 2 Samuel chapter 8. verse 18. It says, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. The Cherethites and the Pelethites were David's bodyguard. 2 Samuel chapter 20 verse 23 says, Joab was over all the army of Israel. Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. 2 Samuel 23 verse 20 says, Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. In the next chapter, it's revealed that the previous commander of David's army, Joab, that was just referred to, was put to death for allying himself with Adonijah, that we're reading about right now. And it's Benaiah that was sent by Solomon to go and strike him down. References made to the locations where the different individuals, Adonijah and his entourage went, and then later where they took Solomon to anoint him as king. In Rogel was where they went, where Adonijah took them. It was near the intersection of the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley, which were both on the southeast side of Jerusalem. So if you're looking at Jerusalem on a map, down at the bottom right would be in Rogel. And there's a reference to Gihon, which was a spring, which was the principal water supply for Jerusalem. It was in the Kidron Valley east of the city, and much fanfare, of course, accompanied the anointing of Solomon as the next king. They went to Gihon, which was also, in terms of proximity to Enrogel, Gihon was only a couple of 100 yards north of where Enrogel was, where Adonijah was celebrating his appointment. So Gihon is also on the bottom right side, the southeast side of Jerusalem, but it's a little bit, just a few hundred yards north. At least the location here would have been just a few hundred yards north of where Adonijah and his group were. And so all the noise caused concern among Adonijah and his followers. Almost immediately, news came regarding what the noise was about. And it was told very plainly that Solomon was being anointed as king at that very moment, and who was involved in it. And so those who were following Adonijah became obviously and understandably fearful, and they fled. What Adonijah and those with him had done would have been viewed as treason. And this is why Adonijah goes and takes hold of the horns of the altar. This is a reference to the altar of incense, which was located inside the tabernacle in the first room known as the holy place. There seems to be a reference to this in Exodus 21 verse 14, where someone was permitted to seek asylum there for having accidentally killed someone. If they were found to be guilty of murder, they were actually to be taken from the altar. That's the reference to it there. And so this act, the altar was small. I think it was about 3 feet high and about a foot and a half. It was square and it had horns. This is one of the pictures that I had that I don't have to show you. But you can look this up on the internet. You can look it up in any Bible dictionary or something like that. But it was about a foot and a half square, and on each corner it had horns, if you will, that protruded upward. And so to do this was a plea for mercy. Adonijah showed that he was afraid of being executed for treason, and Solomon assured him that if he conducted himself appropriately, things would be fine. Well, that's a summary of chapter 1, and the class material does not cover it, but chapter 2 tells about Adonijah trying to marry Abishag, who was the young girl who was brought to David to keep him warm. Solomon had him put to death for this, and it might appear confusing to us as to why Solomon acted so harshly, though he does give a statement that should help clarify it. But this would have been a clear attempt to gain right to the throne. Taking a member of the king's harem, taking one of his wives, one of his concubines, one of his women, would normally be interpreted as a claim to the throne. And this is what Adonijah tries to do. And he's put to death for it, and Joab is also put to death for his connection as well. Next week's topic will be Solomon building the temple, and it's going to skip chapters 2, 3, and 4, and it will cover chapters 5 through 9 in 1 Kings.